Hi there, I'm Funky Crab and I want to talk about Pokemon, specifically the Gen 1 kind. Everyone is very familiar with the original 151 and how iconic they all are to this day. But today I don't want to talk about their designs. Instead, I'm more interested in what they're made of, or more specifically, their typings. Typings are not all treated equally. Bug is not equal to Dragon, Ice is a defensive joke, and Psychic nukes everything, at least in Gen 1. I'm sure everyone is well aware of this, but what you may or may not be aware of is the distribution of these types. Some types are more plentiful than others. If you want a specific type, like Poison for example, there's no shortage of them, and you'll be tripping on Poison types throughout the game. But if you want a Ghost type, then I got bad news for you. There's a Ghost evolution line. And not only is there just one line, but they're also all Poison anyway. Oops! All Poison! I wish the distribution of types in these games was a bit more equal and not super lopsided. So that begs a question. How close do the original Gen 1 games come to equal type distribution, and which of the three games come closest? Here's how the type counting is going to work. We're going to go through the entire Kanto adventure, start to finish, and count types when a Pokemon and its evolutions become available. For example, the Pidgey line contains 3 total Pokemon, all of which are normal and flying. This means the Pidgey line will count for 3 normal types and 3 flying types, while providing a total of 6 type instances. Level up and trait evolutions will be counted when the basic Pokemon can be obtained, and stone evolutions will be counted when the respective stone becomes available. Version exclusive Pokemon will only be counted in their specific version, and Pokemon obtained outside of normal gameplay such as Mew or glitch Pokemon will not be counted. Though, as a fun fact, missing no would cause the type distribution value to become much worse since it's listed as a bird type in its summary. The numbers collected throughout the playthrough will be compared to each game's unique ideal type distribution and create a value that will be used to compare to the other versions. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. Finally, 2 distribution values will be determined for each game, one for the main game and one for the post game. With the explanations out of the way, it's time to start counting those types. Upon entering the lab, Pokemon Red and Blue players must choose one of 3 starter Pokemon. These are the Bulbasaur line, consisting of 3 grass and 3 poison types, the Charmander line, which contains 3 fire and 1 flying type, and the Squirtle line, which accounts for 3 water types. There's only one starter in Yellow version, and that's the electric type Pikachu. This Pikachu is unique, being that it's the only one in the game, cannot evolve into Raichu, and cannot be put into the PC. At this point, you're probably asking yourself, why would I ever choose Yellow over Red and Blue? What benefit could there possibly be to choosing this Pikachu over any of the Kanto starters? The answer is that Yellow players can get all 3 starters later on without trading, which, personally, sounds pretty enticing to me. Starting with Route 1, you can find the Pidgey and Rattata lines, which include 3 normal flying types and 2 normal types respectively. As for Route 22, which is west of Viridian City, 3 new lines can be found here. These include the 2 normal and flying types that make up the Spearow line, as well as the Nidoran female line and the Nidoran male line, which account for 4 poison types for now. If you're playing Yellow version, the Mankey line can be found here, which includes 2 fighting types. North of Viridian City lies Route 2, where the 3 bug and poison types that make up the Weedle line can be encountered in Red version, and the Caterpie line, consisting of 3 bug and 1 flying type, can be found in Blue version. Some of you might be confused by this, swearing that you had seen both bug lines, or maybe even had both of them on your team. The truth is that these memories are false. I'm just kidding. You can find both bug type lines in Viridian Forest in Red and Blue. I have no idea why Game Freak chose to have Caterpie in Blue and Weedle in Red for Route 2 specifically, only to have both in the very next area. I'm not really sure. Anyways, finishing up the Viridian Forest encounters, Yellow version players can get the Caterpie line, and Red and Blue players can find the electric type Pikachu. Unlike their Yellow version counterpart, these Pikachu can evolve later in the game. There's a small path between Viridian Forest and Pewter City, but this is still part of Route 2, so there are no new encounters here. In fact, no new Pokemon can be found until the Pewter City gym leader, Brock, is defeated. At the end of each section, a list of the Pokemon found in said section will be displayed along with their typing and version availability. Adding the total Pokemon we have so far, this ends the early game section with 27 Pokemon obtainable in both Red and Blue versions, and 17 that can be found in Yellow version. Upon defeating Brock, Route 3 will open up to the player with brand new encounters. Red and blue players can find the normal type Jigglypuff, and yellow players can find the ground type Sandshrew line. Inside the Pokemon Center at the end of the route, players can access the Magikarp line consisting of 2 water and 1 flying type. That Pokemon Center also lays at the foot of Mount Moon, which includes the Geodude line consisting of 3 rock and ground types, the Paris line containing 2 grass and 2 bug types, the 2 poison flying types that make up the famous or infamous, depending on who you ask, Zubat line, and the normal type Clefairy. Within Mount Moon is a Moonstone, which gives players access to the normal type Clefable, the poison ground types Nidoqueen and Nidoking, and for red and blue players, the normal type Wigglytuff. Near the end of the cave, players must choose between the Dome Fossil or the Helix Fossil. These fossils can be resurrected into Pokemon, but since it will be a long time until you can actually use the Pokemon, they will be talked about later. Exiting Mount Moon will put players on Route 4, where 2 new lines can be found for red and blue players. Red version get the 2 poison types in the Ekans line, and blue version gets access to the Sandshrew line. Before crossing Nugget Bridge, yellow players can receive a Bulbasaur in Cerulean City if their Pikachu's friendship value is 147 or higher. On Route 24, red players get the Oddish line, blue players get the Bellsprout line, and yellow players get both of the Grass and Poison families. Red and blue players can find the Psychic type Abra, while yellow players get the Bug and Poison Venonat. Additionally, yellow players can obtain Charmander from a trainer located on this route. Route 25 has no new Pokemon, so it's time to tally the total for this section. Pokemon Red and Blue have 22 new Pokemon, while Yellow version has 27 new Pokemon. After defeating Misty and walking through a crime scene, players can make their way south to Route 5, where Red version has Mankey, Yellow gets Abra and Jigglypuff, and Blue version has the normal type Meowth line. Route 6 has no new encounters, but red and blue players can trade a Spearow for the normal and flying type Farfetch'd in Vermilion City. East of the city lies Route 11, which has the Psychic type Drowsy line, and inside Diglett's cave... Stiglet. Who would have thought? If players travel through Diglett's cave, they'll end up back at Route 2. There's a small house where a trader will offer to trade their Psychic type Mr. Mime for an Abra in red and blue, or for a Clefairy in yellow. By cutting down the tree on this route, players can return to Pewter City. There's a second entrance to the museum where an old amber can be received from a scientist. Much like the fossils from Mount Moon, it will be some time until the fossil can be revived. This section was pretty short, with red and blue players finding only 8 Pokemon and yellow finding 10, but this cannot be said about the next section of the game. With the Lightning Americans' defeat, Yellow version can obtain the 3rd and final starter Squirtle right outside of the Vermilion City Gym. In order to proceed, players will need to return to Cerulean and cut the tree leading to Route 9. There aren't any new encounters, but Rock Tunnel has 2 new lines to encounter. The first is the Rock and Ground Onix, and the second is the Machop line, containing 3 fighting types. There are encounters in Lavender Town's Pokemon Tower, but some can't be found without the Silph Scope. You can find the Cubone line, which is made up of 2 ground types, and upon obtaining the Silph Scope, the Ghastly line, which contain the only Ghost-type Pokemon in the whole game. Oh yeah, and I guess they're Poison types too. West of Lavender Town is Route 8, which contained 2 new Fire Pokemon, both of which are version exclusive. Red version gets Growlithe, and blue version gets Vulpix. While you can't evolve them just yet, you can obtain their Evolution Stone in the very next city, Celadon City. Yellow version doesn't get any new encounters. Going through the underground path leads to Route 7, which also doesn't have any new encounters. Celadon City is a very important location in the Generation 1 games due to the sheer amount of Pokemon that become available. Starting with the Game Corner, red players can get Scyther, a bug and flying type, blue players can get its counterpart Pinsir, a bug type, and both can get the Dratini line with 3 dragon types and 1 flying type. Yellow players not only have access to both bug types, but Vulpix can be obtained here as well. Wrapping up the Game Corner, all versions get access to Porygon, a normal type Pokemon. At the top of the Celadon condominiums is a Pokeball containing an Eevee, a normal type that can evolve into 3 different Pokemon. Speaking of evolutions, players can purchase the Evolutionary Stones at the Celadon department store. The Water Stone only allows players to evolve Eevee into Vaporeon for right now, but other Pokemon will appear later that require it. The Leaf Stone evolves Gloom into Vileplume for red and yellow players, while blue and yellow players can use it to evolve Weepinbell into Victreebel. The Fire Stone evolves Eevee into Flareon, Growlithe into Arcanine for red players, and Vulpix into Ninetales for blue and yellow players. Finally, the Yellowstone evolves Eevee into Jolteon, an electric type, and Pikachu into Raichu for red and blue players. Upon completing the Pokemon Tower, players can wake up the normal type Snorlax and battle it. Finally, the... can't believe I wrote this. The duo in the Doduo line can be found on Route 16, counting for 2 normal flying types. It's tally time. This time around, all 3 versions have the same amount of new Pokemon, that being 22. Now that the Grass Gym is out of the way, it's time to make a short trek to Fuchsia City. Heading west will lead to Route 17, where yellow players can find the Fire-type Ponyta line. Red and blue players can move along, as there's no new Pokemon found until Fuchsia City. Much like other cities with gyms, there are some new Pokemon that can be found in Fuchsia City before challenging the gym. This is where the Good Rod can be obtained, granting access to new Pokemon. The Old Rod was kinda glossed over earlier, since the only Pokemon that can be found with the Rod was Magikarp. In this city, you can now fish for Poliwag, whose line accounts for 3 water types and 1 fighting type, and Goldeen, a water line with 2 Pokemon. If red and blue players obtain a Poliwhirl and return to Cerulean City, it can be traded for the Ice and Psychic type Pokemon Jinx. Fuchsia City is also the location of the Safari Zone. Red and blue players can finally get their hands on Venonat, while yellow players can catch the grass type Tangela. Players can find the Execute line, the Rhyhorn line, and the normal types Chansey, Kangaskhan, and Tauros. Once again, this section has 15 new Pokemon for red, blue, and yellow versions. With the newfound ability to surf in the overworld, heading south sounds tempting, but we'll cover that later. For now, we'll go east onto Route 15, where red and blue players can find the normal type Ditto. While Route 14 has no new Pokemon, Route 13 gives yellow players the opportunity to catch the normal and flying type Farfetch'd, as well as the Slowpoke line while surfing, with both members being water psychic types. Route 12 doesn't have any new Pokemon, but it does have a vital new item, the Super Rod. This gives red and blue players the ability to catch Slowpoke, and gives yellow players Dratini in the Safari Zone. With the strongest fishing rod, the floodgates, funnily enough, open for many water types, such as the Tentacool line, the Krabby line, Psyduck line, by the way, yellow players can surf on Route 6 for Psyduck, and the Shelter line. Additionally, yellow players can find Horsea, accounting for 2 water types. Now that red and blue players have access to Slowbro, they can trade it for a Lickitung, a normal Pokemon on Route 18. This is a little out of the way, but a new area can be explored east of Cerulean City, the Power Plant. Inside of the Power Plant, players can encounter the electric-type lines of Magnemite and Voltorb. Red players can catch Electabuzz, and yellow players can encounter the poison-type Grimer line. Finally, players can encounter the legendary electric-flying-type Zapdos. On the topic of out-of-the-way encounters, if red and blue players return all the way to Pallet Town and surf a little bit south, Tangela can be found in a patch of grass. I was going to put Tangela in a later section since it's so far away on the other side of the region, but I figured that it was only fair to put Tangela here since I talked about the power plant. Personally, I would wait until getting the ability to fly outside of battle, but if you just can't wait to get Tangela and you're the biggest Tangela fan out there, you can go here now to get it. It's been a long time coming, but it's finally time to enter Saffron City. The gym is locked until you defeat Team Rocket at Silph Co, but there are other Pokemon to find here. In the Fighting Dojo, players have a choice between the fighting types of Hitmonlee and Hitmonchan. Lastly, in Silph Co, players can get a free Lapras, which is a water and ice type. Now for the results of this section, red has 21 Pokemon, blue has 20, and yellow has 26. It's time to fly back to Fuchsia City and head south to Route 19. Red and blue players can encounter Horsea for the first time, and all 3 versions can encounter the Staryu line, which contains 2 water and 1 psychic type. Route 20 has no new encounters, but it is the location of the Seafoam Islands. Within its depths, players can encounter Seal, a water type that gains the ice type when it becomes Dugong. Additionally, the legendary ice-flying Pokemon Articuno can be found on the lowest floor. Going west from Seafoam Islands will lead to Cinnabar Island, the location of the 7th gym. It can't be accessed until after going through the Pokemon Mansion and obtaining the secret key. Red and blue players can find Coughing, a poison type line, as well as finally getting to obtain the Ponyta and Grimer lines. Exclusive to Blue version is Magmar, a Fire-type Pokemon. Yellow players also gain access to the Growlithe line and Ditto. Also located on Cinnabar is the Cinnabar Lab, where fossils can be revived. Players can obtain one of two rock-water types, which are the Ammonite line or the Kabuto line depending on your fossil. Additionally, the Old Amber can be revived into an Aerodactyl, a rock and flying type. No new Pokemon can be found before the final gym. In fact, there's only one Pokemon left that can be found before even becoming champion. Deep within Victory Road, players can encounter the final legendary bird, Moltres, a fire and flying type. For this section, Red has a total of 19 new Pokemon, Blue has 20 new Pokemon, and Yellow has 14 new Pokemon. With the title of champion in our possession, it's time to visit the final area of the game, Cerulean Cave, to find the final Pokemon of the journey. Oh, and Lickitung is here for Yellow version. I guess Lickitung was just so strong in Red and Blue that Game Freak amended this mistake by locking it to the postgame. No. The real reason to travel to the deepest part of Cerulean Cave is to encounter the final Pokemon of the game, that being the legendary Mewtwo, a Psychic-type Pokemon. It's not too much of an addition, but Red and Blue versions get one new Pokemon, and Yellow version gets two new Pokemon. And with that, we have encountered every possible Pokemon and recorded their types. We'll do a quick review of all the type instances, starting with the numbers for before the Elite Four. Mewtwo and Lickitung for Yellow will be accounted for later. Starting with normal types, Red has 22, Blue has 24, and Yellow has 21. For grass types, Red and Blue have 11, and Yellow has 14. For fire types, Red ironically has the lowest number out of the trio with 9, Blue has 10, and Yellow has 11. For water types, all games have 32. For electric types, Red has 9, Blue has 8, and similar to Red version, Yellow has the lowest number of electric types with 7. For rock types, 11 Pokemon across the board. For ground types, Red has 12, while Blue and Yellow have 14. For flying types, Red and Yellow share 19, while Blue has 18. For bug types, Red and Blue have 11, while Yellow has 9. For poison types, Red has 30, Blue has 28, and Yellow has 26. For ice types, Red and Blue have 5, and Yellow has 4. For fighting types, Red and Yellow share 8, while Blue has 6. For psychic types, Red and Blue have 12, and Yellow has 11. For ghost types, all 3 versions have 3 Pokemon. And for dragon types, all 3 versions have 3 Pokemon. Altogether, Red has 197 type instances, Blue has 196, and Yellow has 193. Now that we have all the information we need, let's plug the data into our series of formulas. The first thing we'll calculate for will be the ideal distribution value, or IDV for short. Since there are 15 available types in these games, we'll divide 100 by 15 to get 6.67%. The IDV will be used for comparing the distribution values of other types. Think of it as the percentage that all types will try to match. To see it in action, we'll solve for the percent distribution of normal types in Pokemon Red's postgame as an example. The total amount of normal types in the game, being 22, will be divided by the total amount of type instances, which is the sum of all type amounts in a specific game. In this case, Red's postgame has a total type instance value of 198. The resulting number will be multiplied by 100 to give a percent value. For this example, the percent distribution, or PD, of normal types for Red's postgame is 11.11%, meaning that normal types make up roughly 11% of Red version's overall types in its postgame. With that 11.11% value, we can subtract the IDV from it to find the difference, and that difference will be our type deviation, or TD for short. The order of subtraction doesn't matter, since the absolute values will be taken. By subtracting these numbers, we get 4.44. This process will be repeated for every type in each category for each game. For the sake of time and sanity, we won't go through every calculation. The type deviations for each respective category will be added up, creating the total distribution value, or TDV. This can be used to compare Pokemon games to see which one has a better overall type distribution. When comparing TDVs, a game with a lower TDV has the better distribution, so a lower value means less deviation from the ideal. I have created a pie chart for each version, that way we can have a visual for the type distribution. The IDV is also listed, so that way we can see how close or far each type is from that ideal value. Now for the moment you've all been waiting for. Which Gen 1 Pokemon game has the best type distribution? Which game gives the best overall type variety? Is it red version, blue version, or yellow version? Coming in with a rounded TDV of 50.57, the winner is Pokemon Yellow version, by a margin. Pokemon Blue had the highest TDV with 51.7, and Pokemon Red was in the middle, but being a little bit closer to Blue with 51.24. When taking the post-game encounters into account, Yellow leads with 50.26, Red lands in second with 50.71, and Blue finishes third with 51.1. This shows that type distribution was a little bit better in the post-game when compared to just the main game. You're probably thinking, okay, Yellow version having better type distribution does make sense, I mean it is the third version. But how did Blue version end up with a worse TDV than Red version? Well, at first glance, the two versions have different total type instances, with Red's main game value being 197 and Blue's being 196. This small difference led to different values despite some individual type instances being identical on paper. For example, Red and Blue have the same amount of grass types, that being 11. When divided by their respective main game TTIs, Red's grass type percent distribution is 5.56%, while Blue's grass type PD is 5.58%. Given that there are other types that Red and Blue share the same amount of, these small differences are added up. If you're curious about where Red gets his additional type instance, it's because of Scyther's dual bug and flying typing compared to the mono bug type Pinsir. However, Blue's worst TDV goes much deeper than this. I added an extra flying type instance to Blue version, expecting that the TDVs of Red and Blue would become equal. After all, this would give both versions the same total type instance of 197. So, what happened? Well, the opposite happened. Blue version's TDV actually increased. I combed over the calculations to find out why this was occurring, and after a long while of looking, I found the answer, and it was found deep in the ground types. It was the ground types. Let me explain. After adding an extra flying type, there were 5 unique type distribution amounts that separated Red and Blue. Red has 1 extra electric type, 2 extra fighting types, and 2 extra poison types, whereas Blue has 1 extra fire type, 2 extra normal types, and 2 extra ground types. Now, bear with me, things might get a little complicated. You see, there's a value that I haven't brought up until now, that being the type instance ideal, or TII. It basically functions as the non-percentage version of the IDV. Instead of comparing percents, we can compare the amount of type instances to what they should aim to be. We can divide the 197 by 15 and get roughly 13.13. Going back to the unique type distributions I mentioned earlier, these amounts can be either beneficial or harmful to a game's TDV, depending on where these extra types are placed. If an extra instance is added to a type and it decreases the deviation from the type instance ideal, then it's beneficial due to bridging the deviation gap. If it's added to a type and it increases deviation, then it's harmful, since it gets farther away from the ideal. It just so happens that both games' type distributions have a beneficial +1, a beneficial +2, and a harmful +2. So let's see how they're placed. Red and Blue's beneficial +1 type seem okay with helping to decrease their deviation, and their harmful +2s also affect the version's deviation equally. It's the beneficial +2 for each version that get a little weird. You see, Red version's 2 extra fighting types help to decrease its TDV fairly well. As for Blue version, their 2 extra ground types cross over to the other side of the type instance ideal, meaning that the beneficial +2 isn't as effective at lowering Blue's TDV as Red's beneficial +2 are. Out of curiosity, I removed 1 ground type from each version, that way Blue's beneficial +2 would have its full effect. I checked the TDVs, and they were identical for the main game and the post game. Additionally, if the changes to the version's ground types were kept, and Red still had the extra flying type, Blue would actually have a better TDV than Red version. To wrap that little tangent up, there are 2 reasons why Blue's TDV is different or worse than Red's. The reason why it's different is because Scyther has an additional type to give Red version a slightly different total type instance. As for why it's worse, Blue's 2 extra ground types aren't as beneficial as Red's 2 extra fighting types. So, what do all these numbers ultimately mean? Well, despite Yellow version having marginally better type distribution than Red and Blue, The three versions' overall type distributions are fairly close to one another. There are plenty of reasons for choosing any of the three versions over the other, such as red version having every electric type, blue version having every normal type, and yellow version having every fire type. However, when it comes to how the typings are distributed amongst its Pokémon, yellow version does it best. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. I hope you enjoyed it. This is the first video I've made, and despite how long it took with the difficulties it posed, I'm so happy that it's finally done. It's something that I've wanted to make for a long time. I've learned a lot from making this video, and I'm already thinking of ways to improve the next video I make. Admittedly, when I started this project, the Generation 1 Pokemon games were not the only games that I wanted to work on. I want to try this type distribution idea for other games in the Pokemon series and compare how type distribution changes throughout the generations. So, if you enjoyed the video and you're interested in seeing where things go from here, please consider subscribing so you can be notified when the next video comes out. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you'll be there when the next video drops.